Okay, here's part 4. The following Saturday, David went down to Optus Oval to be the game doctor for the under-14 Australian rules football match, and it was exciting with a lot of biff, and every father was blaming the umpire for wrong decisions. David loves footy, and he wants to help the players reach their full potential. In the 13th minute of the last quarter of the match, 4 or 8 match 4 of 8, one of the players was hit pretty fiercely, and the match was called to a halt, and David came onto the field to see if he will be all right. David was checking his physical and mental condition, like asking him questions like, "What is your name? Where do you live? And what are you here for?" And so on and so forth. The coach was helping David with his proceedings. Eventually, the kid woke up and was given a full bill of health by David, but suggested to the coach to leave him off for the remainder of the match. And when the game is over, ask him to see me so I could give him a full checkup. The coach did that, and the boy, whose name was Freddie Piper, was upset and saying things like, he didn't really mean to friends and family. He didn't really mean to friends and family. Meanwhile, David was called onto the field left, right and centre and had to call the ambulance when the star player had to be carried off and go to hospital. When that happened, an umpire has been punched by an irate father, and the police were called in. And David was looking after the umpire, and the ambos drove him towards the hospital. At the end of the day, David was bushed and wanted to go to the pub to have a nice cold beer. Just one, so Ron doesn't get upset with him or anything. But when he got to the pub, he just sat in there and watched the first quarter of Adelaide Crows versus Brisbane Lions on television before he went to the clinic where he lived to totally relax. 3 days later, the Coopers were called out to a house in Preston to offer assistance to 3 drunken teenagers celebrating the end of school. The party was cut short when the roof of their home decided to cave in, knocking each of them right out. There was Pamela in the grey dress and Samantha in the green and white, and the other one in the green and gold Australian sporting top was Billy Randall. When the Coopers arrived at the house, the paramedics were there to tell them the whole deal with it all. Pamela was unconscious while Samantha was talking gibberish. And while Billy could talk, but he had his legs caught under the wood that came from the ceiling. And he was worried because he couldn't move anything. The paramedics were trying to figure out how to get him out of there in one piece, which at that time they couldn't. They thought they could do exactly that. And Billy, no matter how much pain he was in, was trying to get out in one piece. David went over to check on Samantha, who was saying things like, My brain was used as an experiment 3 years before I was born. My brain was used in an experiment 3 years before I was born. My brain was used in an experiment 3 years before I was born. But the Coopers knew that she has injuries, and they weren't ruling out brain damage. Sue went to help Pamela try to regain consciousness and told her mum and dad to talk to her as if she would get through this. Of course, they found it hard, but they had to remain positive to help her know there are people who love her around. The paramedics were trying so hard to move Billy out of the wrecking roof, but it was hard. But it was making Billy too sore, and there was no way they could get him out of there without amputating his 2 legs. But Billy, who was scared, kept on pulling, knowing he is a fighter as well as a tough old boot. The paramedics told David that amputation is the only way to save Billy's life, and he needs to know that he will die if we try to save his legs. Billy, who was drunk, started swearing at David, refusing to give up on his legs. You fucking idiot! I don't want to lose my legs. You fucking idiot! I don't want to lose my legs. It was hard for David to bear hearing rubbish coming out of his mouth, but he understood his pain. It is hard to think of life without walking, because he wouldn't be able to go to the pub independently anymore, and that is his life. David told the paramedics that Sally was offering counselling for Pamela's parents, warning them that she will never be the same again, both physical and mental. Samantha started saying stupid things like, my mum forgot to get the fucking house insured, and that meant I'm homeless. My mum forgot to get the fucking house insured, and that meant I'm homeless. Ron used his mobile to call Sam's parents, who were on holidays in the Gold Coast, but when they heard about Sam, they got on the first plane back home. Pamela eventually woke up from the coma, but the paramedics worried that they have to amputate her legs as well. When she said she couldn't feel them, David eventually talked Billy around to the amputation, saying that you could still lead an exciting life. You just have to limit it, that's all. Now David has to talk Pamela around about life with no legs as well, and it was hard when she said that 4 years ago she had to deal with no legs, and they eventually came through for her. Even if she was limping around like a mad woman, it will be better than being in a wheelchair permanently. David said David had to let nature take its course and not hassle her. The paramedics were starting to amputate Billy's legs, and while having him under sedation. Samantha was the first one to go in the ambulance with severe brain damage and a head brace on her head. And after that, Pamela went in and she began to feel her legs in the ambulance, but they had to have open heart surgery. As well, she had to have a neck brace. After taking 3 hours and 30 minutes to do it, Billy has had both his legs amputated, and then after that, he was driven to the hospital in the ambulance. Billy had to have surgery for the joints in his arms and elbows, as well as a neck brace on his neck. After a really hectic day, David decided to go to the pub to unwind and got into a conversation with the singer of a music group that was playing there that night. David bought him and Johnny Sibber a beer and talking about such a hard day he put in at work. And Johnny was telling him that he works as a cleaner at the Victoria Hotel in the heart of Melbourne, and it gets very demanding. As their conversation got deeper and deeper, they added a few drinking songs, like 99 bottles of beer on a wall, and who's your father, referee, when the father who was doing the football match was on television, would stuff up. And that was the end of part 4. Part 5 soon.